All right, let's get started. I'm Jeremy Sims, and I want to do a little Bible study and share it with you here on YouTube. To give you a little backstory of what's going on with me, uh, I go to a little church, and we recently started a small group. And in that small group, we started studying the book of Galatians. And we did something a little different with the book of Galatians in that we chose a single chapter, and then we spent like a couple weeks on it. And I started reading the Bible in a way I hadn't previously. I actually got into it, and instead of just reading through it casually or looking up a few things and studying a specific aspect of the chapter or a subject, I ended up just trying to come up with as many questions as possible as I could about the chapter and spending a lot of time on it every day just trying to dig real deep. And I found it to be, well, way more satisfying than any other Bible study I'd ever done before, because when you really get into the nitty gritty, you find all sorts of stuff that you'd miss if you just did a casual read through, or if you're just coming to the text looking for something in particular to draw out of it. So I found it a very rewarding way to study the Bible. I've really enjoyed it. I've been loving it. And then our small group ended. We kind of go in semesters. Our small group kind of goes in semesters, and it wrapped up, and we haven't started back up yet. In the meantime, I decided, well, I'm getting so much out of this, I'm just gonna continue. I'm gonna pick another book on my own. So I decided to do a random number generator. And if you don't know what that is, you just type in a certain set of numbers and then hit generate, and it'll pick one of the numbers for you. So I did 1 through 66, the books of the Bible, and it returned with book number 4, Numbers. And if there is a single book of the Bible I would be less interested in studying carefully, it would I can't think of it. Numbers has got to be the least interesting book of the Bible, or so I thought. But on the surface, here's the thing: you got different sections of the Bible, and our churches pretty much focus primarily on the New Testament. Everything there is fair game, more or less. All the epistles, and then the story aspects, both in the New and Old Testament. So you got the doctrinal stuff for our modern Christian practice that gets talked about a lot, and then Bible stories. We hear both of those things quite a bit. The rest of the Bible really doesn't get touched very much. Psalms, Proverbs, you hear those somewhat often. Ecclesiastes maybe once in a blue moon. Prophecy, if a preacher is feeling ambitious, they might want to tackle prophecy. But there's a lot of the Bible that we just don't touch. The stuff with the Mosaic Law, that doesn't get touched very often. All the prophecy stuff, really, people usually just talk about Revelation if they're going to talk about prophecy, or they pull out a few passages there specifically about Jesus from the Old Testament. But there's tons more there that just gets ignored. In fact, I'd say our churches probably generally teach maybe 50% of the Bible, and the other half may as well not be there. I mean, when's the last time you've heard anybody preach from Isaiah or Ezekiel or Jeremiah? It's very uncommon. Again, especially if you're getting away from those few sections that mention Jesus. So, but still, in my opinion, I love the books of wisdom. Psalms I'm okay with. Narratives are always fun. The doctrinal stuff is always fun for me. Prophecy, I'm not a big fan because it's so ambiguous. But, a bunch of the Old Testament prophecy stuff is, fulfilled and pretty concrete. Some of it's not. And that stuff would be fun to look at. Even the stuff with the Mosaic Law, that can be fun as well. It's weird, but, you can still look at it and say, oh, I didn't know about this, and what does this mean? What's the purpose of this? How does it apply? What principles can we draw from it? All that stuff to me is interesting. Numbers is about numbers. And as an Arkansan, I don't like numbers. I can't math. But numbers is very dry. It's literally a lot of organizational stuff. It's like where you'll walk and in what order and who goes where and who's allowed to do what. And it's like a bunch of, from the outside, really boring rules. But I thought, hey, I've committed to this. Let me go ahead. If I don't get anything out of numbers, I'll just go through it quickly. If I spend a day or two on a single chapter and I'm like, I'm done, I'll just move on. Instead, what I found was that when I started studying it real carefully is that there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff. It's not as gripping as a story or as, as applicable to your day-to-day life as something from the epistles, but there's actually a lot of stuff in there that's pretty interesting. So, something else I did while I was doing my Bible study with the small group is that I'd go on YouTube every day and pull up some sermons for the chapter we were studying and just hear a bunch of different perspectives of things different preachers had gotten out of the Bible. And that was really interesting. So when I started Numbers, I tried the same thing, and there is nothing. Nobody talks about Numbers. It's so funny. I mean, you can find hundreds, if not thousands, of lessons on Galatians 1. And I found, I think, one sermon that's on Numbers 1, which is like a 60-verse book by itself. It's not a small book, and nobody wants to talk about it. And I understand why. It's not that typical stuff you'd expect, but it's in the Bible. Maybe we should teach it. Just a thought. So nobody does anything like this, and I think it deserves it, and I think it's kind of interesting. So, since I wasn't doing anything with these observations I made, I thought, well, maybe if I made a YouTube video, I can kind of fill that void and maybe it can be a help to somebody else. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So just to be clear, I am nobody. I am some schmuck. I've been a Christian for, since my, I think, preteens. And I've been in some good churches, but I'm not a theologian in any way. I'm not especially studied. I've just been looking at this stuff carefully and praying about it, and hopefully have some stuff that'll be interesting to you. I'm hoping to go through verses 1 through 19 of Numbers chapter 1. Here's a little teaser of things that were interesting to me that we'll talk about here in a little bit. This section of the Bible has this, what I think of as a boring list of names. It's just one name after another, or at least it seems that way on your first reading. So something that I thought was interesting is that there's actually useful stuff in here, stuff that's useful for the historicity of the Bible, things that are useful, they're just kind of funny, and there's also stuff, there's a lot of information about what specifically God is doing here that I think if you just read it once or twice, you might miss. What's the purpose of what God's doing here? How exactly does it work? What exactly is God saying? And also, what's the timeline for this sort of stuff? Because I don't know about you, but I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about when these different events took place in relation to one another. So those are all some of the things we're going to talk about. And I think at this point we'll just go ahead and start reading the text. So Numbers 1 through 19, Numbers chapter 1, verses 1 through 19. That'd be quite different if I did all of Numbers 1 through 19. Please listen to me read for the next 4 hours. So I'm going to read it. I'm using the ESV. I know I have some friends who might see this that are KJV only people, and sorry. Something I was going to say earlier, again, I'm a schmuck. I don't know anything, so if you see something that I get wrong, please holler at me, correct me, help me learn, just chew up the meat, spit up the bones. All right, let's go ahead and read. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take the census of all the congregation of the people of Israel, by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male head by head, from 20 years old and upward, all in Israel who are able to go to war, you and Aaron shall list them, company by company. And there shall be with you a man from each tribe, each man being the head of the house of his fathers. And these are the names of the men who shall assist you, from Reuben. Oh, by the way, I have not looked up the pronunciation on any of these. I'll probably slaughter it, so bear with me. Verse 5, from Reuben, Elizur, the son of Shadur. From Simeon, Shelumiel, the son of Zurishaddai. From Judah, Nahshon, the son of Amminadab. From Issachar, Nathaniel, the son of Zoar. From Zebulun, Eliab, the son of Helon. From the sons of Joseph. From Ephraim, Elishama, the son of Amminahud. And from Manasseh, Gamliel, the son of Pedizur. From Benjamin, Abidan, the son of Gedoni. From Dan, Ahiezer, the son of Ammishaddai. From Asher, Pagiel, the son of Ochran. From Gad, Eliasaph, the son of Duel. From Naphtali, Ahira, the son of Enan. These were the ones chosen from the congregation, the chiefs of their ancestral tribes, the heads of the clans of Israel. Moses and Aaron took these men who had been named, And on the first day of the second month they assembled the whole congregation together, who registered themselves by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, head by head, as the Lord commanded Moses. So he listed them in the wilderness of Sinai. It's just a little background here. Numbers is named for a census that takes at the beginning of the book of Numbers and the end of the book of Numbers. If you know anything about the Bible, you know that the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they went to Mount Sinai, and then they went to Israel. And they were supposed to go and take the land of Israel, but instead the spies got scared about the strength of the forces there, and they cowered out, and instead they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years before they were able to go back and take another stab at taking over the land of Israel. So there was a census done at Mount Sinai before they departed to the land of Israel, and then after they wandered in the wilderness for a long time and a bunch of them died off, and when they came back to Israel that second time, when it was time for them to actually take the land, another census was done at that point. So this is done, those are the two censuses in question here. I think it's interesting. I looked up some Jewish commentary on the book of Numbers because I was just curious on their cultural ideas on things. It's not Bible, but I just wanted their perspective on things because, again, there aren't a ton of Christian commentaries on Numbers compared to the resources you can find on other books of the Bible. So I thought it was interesting the Jewish people have different names for the books of the Bible. Instead of calling Numbers, they call it Bamidbar. I don't know how to pronounce it. Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness, which I think is a cooler name, personally, in the wilderness, because that is mostly what the book is about. But anyway, that again might be because Mark Hansen and I don't like numbers, so who knows. Let's go ahead and start with the first verse. The Lord spoke in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day on the second month in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt. So the first thing that came to my mind as I was reading this is, wait a second, it's the first day of the second month in the second year after they left Egypt? Why in the world are they still at Mount Sinai? I'd never done the timeline on this sort of thing before. I don't know how many of you have, but it's not that crazy long a distance between Egypt and Mount Sinai. Why are they still there? So this is the deal on that. I'm rounding to the nearest month here, but essentially this is the timeline. It took them about 2 months to get from the land of Egypt to Mount Sinai. And then once they were at Mount Sinai, they spent about 3 months with Moses going up onto the mountain and visiting with God. I think there were 2 trips, if I'm not mistaken, up to the mountain. So roughly 3 months with God and Moses talking. And then they get from God the instructions about how to build the tabernacle, and they spend the next 7 months camped out there just working on the tabernacle, getting all the stuff together. So that's 7 months gathering supplies, 3 months on the mountain, and 2 months getting to the mountain. So that's a whole year right there. So after all that time, they build the tabernacle at the beginning of the second year. And then this is 1 month after they built the tabernacle. This is, I guess, the next time God spoke to them and gave them instruction for the census. Verse 2, take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel, by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male, head by head. So one of the first things this made me think of was, I kind of had the impression, I think some people have taught me this before, that censuses were bad and the Bible didn't like them, specifically because of the incident in, I believe it was 1 Chronicles 21:1, where David takes the census, and long story short, it does not work well for the people of Israel, or David. It seems like, in looking at that again, because that came to mind as I was studying this, it seems like that was mostly about David, first of all, doing something that God had not commanded, and also typically these censuses are done for accumulating power, an issue of pride, perhaps even getting ready to go to war, which in David's case would be a war of aggression. So if that's what he was planning, the text is a little ambiguous. But anyway, apparently not a problem with censuses, at least when God orders them, of course. So, and this actually also isn't the first census they did. There's one that was done earlier, which we'll talk about probably in some other video. So it says, take a census of all of the people, all of the congregation, but it actually doesn't mean all. There is an exception made later in this chapter for the Levites. The Levites are not to be counted in this particular census, and we won't get that far today, so I just want to clarify that issue. So I want to dive into what exactly clans and fathers' houses meant in this verse. So clans, as it's used here, is the Hebrew word mispaka, or something like that. And it means a family or a circle of relatives, figuratively a class of persons, species, yada, yada, yada. Basically, it's a word that is used pretty flexibly just to refer to some group of people in a family type relationship. So it's pretty broad. It can be used to talk about big families. It can be talked about little families. So it's hard to know exactly what it means in this particular section. Now, fathers' houses is a little bit different. I'm not going to bother showing the term on the screen because it's two words, fathers and houses, and they're pretty much direct translations of those concepts. They're as close to the language as you can possibly get. But there is some nuance in there. I'm not going to bother putting up the term for fathers' houses, but I'll describe it to you. Fathers' houses is pretty much a direct, clear translation of Ab, which means fathers, and Bayeth, which means houses. So if you look up the Westminster's Theological Wordbook of the Bible for the term family, you'll come across Bayeth. And it talks a little bit about this concept. And Bayeth at the time was a little bit different than what we think of as a family because it is a patriarchal unit that lasts as long as the oldest father lives. So if we were living in a society that was based around a Bayeth kind of concept, it would be I would be part of my father's household along with my two brothers. We would all be part of one big household. So would my wife, so would my kids, up until the time he dies. Even if I have kids and grandkids myself, we are still all part of my the Bayeth of my father. So that's how they organized things at the time. The oldest living patriarch was the head of the household. So that might be what this means here, Ab Bayeth. However, it's not clear because Ab Bayeth isn't just the word Bayeth. This father's houses isn't just the term Bayeth, which means houses, which is translated houses in this case. It's also Ab Bayeth, and we don't see that phrase very often. I didn't bother sharing it, it's not worth going into in detail, but if you look ahead to Numbers 3:21 through 24, you'll see one of the few other places in the Bible where it uses the term Ab Bayeth. I assume everybody watching this probably knows there are 12 tribes of Israel, which are more or less, we'll get into it later, the sons of Israel. Well, it seems that, at least in Numbers 3, Ab Bayeth, father's houses, is a term that refers to the grandsons of Israel. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting to me. So, regardless, this is clearly saying that God wants a census, and he wants this to be very organized in terms of not only people's tribes, but also in terms of perhaps the father's houses, meaning the grandsons of Israel, and some sort of clan unit, family unit. It's very organized as to who do you belong to. It's very important to God for some reason in this section. Very organized. So it also mentions the number of names. And I do not know what number of names means. I've looked for it, but I just simply can't find it. A lot of people make reference to genealogies, but I can't get somebody to clearly explain what that means and to even definitively say that this number of names refers to the genealogies. That's my best guess. I did say that there was a census earlier that took place in the book of Exodus. Perhaps the number of names could be referring back to a previous census, the one done in Exodus. Those are my only two guesses. So it also says every male head by head, so it's talking about every single man is individually being counted as part of this census. So it's a very intensive process. All right, verse 3, from 20 years old and upward, all in Israel who are able to go to war, you and Aaron shall list them, company by company. So here we get the purpose of the census. This isn't just a, hey, let's see how many heads are there, or whatever, like the censuses we have here, where they're just wanting to take 500 different points of information to know every single thing about us. It's not that sort of deal. It's being organized specifically company by company. Now, it probably gives you the impression without me going into it, but in case it doesn't, this is specifically for the purposes of war. Here's the words being used there, company by company, to Saba, I guess. A mass of persons, especially regularly organized for war, by implication a campaign, literally or figuratively, blah, 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 blah. Sorry for the blah, 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 but, you know, these are strong concordance definitions, and they go on for a while sometimes. So, Regardless, it's talking about people being organized for the purpose of war. They are not just taking names, they're also breaking people into units. They want to know where you came from, and they want to know who you're going to be fighting with when it comes time to fight. So, on that note, I find it kind of interesting who is allowed to be part of this war census. Well, only those that are 20 years old and upward. And I find that interesting. I came to from a church that was very big on rules, which has its positive sides and its negative sides. And they also discussed, issues of war that were going on at the time. I've never heard anybody point out that the Bible seems to be suggesting here that the age to fight is age 20. And I think that's kind of interesting. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that applies in modern days. I wouldn't want to over-apply it. But I think it's interesting that God has a specific thing for where says somebody's ready to go to war. In this particular time, I was curious where that came from, so here's some information I thought was pretty interesting. There are a few other places in the Bible that the age 20 is referenced, seemingly to be a point of distinction in men, where they're classified differently. All right, so in Exodus 30:14, there's an offering being made, and this is actually part of the census that was being done earlier. And there also, it only counted the men who were 20 years old and older. So there's another place where that distinction is made. In Leviticus 27:1-3, there's some laws about people who are making vows, and there's a certain sort of financial evaluation of you as you're making these vows. I didn't look into that section in detail, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. But regardless, there's some sort of financial evaluation being made, and the value of that financial evaluation depends on your age, and the distinction line is 20. People who are 20 have a different financial evaluation than those who are younger. So again, there's something there. And finally, in Ezra 3:8, there the Levites are appointed to do the work of the Lord, and it's only those that are 20 years and older that are able to do the work of the Lord. So again, I was trying to figure out if there's some sort of reason for this distinction, and one of the people I came across was somebody named Rashi. All right, and Rashi is a famous Jewish commentator on the Bible. He lived 1,000 years after Christ. This is not a guy who was writing at the times. I don't want to give that impression. This is certainly not Bible, but it is cultural and perhaps reflects some of the mindset that was going on at the time. Again, being cautious here, but might somehow have some insight into the mindset of the time. So, particularly Rashi, again a Jewish guy who did commentary on the Bible, he said that at age 20, men begin the pursuit of livelihood. And according to Jewish tradition, this is when you are accountable to God. So this is basically when you start your life in a certain way of Jewish thinking, at least at this time, which granted was much later. And also that's when you're accountable to God. And it's kind of weird that that's when you're accountable to God, because you have to start following the law at age 13 in the Jewish culture, as I understand it. So it's weird that you have to start following at 13, but you're not accountable to age 20. Kind of odd. Anyway, this just points to, and also this is some of this information. I wasn't able to get all the way back to Rashi. I found this on a discussion board that seemed to be what they were talking about. I just thought it was kind of interesting. Take it with a giant grain of salt. Anyway, so there's some sort of distinction that's being made at age 20 that I thought was kind of interesting. You see that Moses and Aaron are the two that are charged to have that responsibility, the ones who are supposed to be in charge of the census. One more thing for verse 3. It says specifically, all in Israel who were able to go to war. So there are some people, presumably, maybe they had some physical handicap, or they were just too old to hold a sword anymore, or they were blind. I guess that'd be physical handicap. But, not everybody was going. These are just the people who were ready to go to war. All right, verse 4. And, of course, we're not talking about trained soldiers here. Nobody was a trained soldier at this point in the land of Israel, as far as we know. It would make sense because the Egyptians were concerned about the Israelites taking over, so they certainly were going to teach them how to fight. All right, moving on to verse 4. And there shall be with you a man from each tribe, each man being the head of the house of his fathers. So you see that there are some assistance given to Moses and Aaron in their count. So why exactly were they there to help? Well, It's not specifically lined out, but presumably just a count. So, spoiler alert, if you zoom forward a little bit, you find out that the count of the men of Israel who were above the age of 20 that were able to fight but were in this war census is 603,550. So if you did nothing but just list names for 16 hours a day, and it was just Moses and Aaron, if it was just Moses and Aaron for 16 hours a day doing nothing but listing the names of people, and they could do one name in every 10 seconds, which seems like a pretty quick pace, actually, considering the writing equipment at the time, and, it would be quite an ordeal, right? It would actually take 104 days to complete that. 10 seconds per person, Moses and Aaron doing it alone for 600 and whatever number I said, 600,000 people. So quite a lot. And that doesn't work very well because we know from the Bible that in Numbers 10 verse 11 that they actually departed from Israel 19 days after this happened, after they were given the instructions. So you can see why maybe they need some assistance. Now, if you give them 12 extra people, and Moses and Aaron and the 12 other people that were assistants, one from each tribe, then it only takes 9 days, so that helps considerably. And of course, there's no reason to think that necessarily these were the only people counting. It's very possible, but I don't think the text is completely clear. It may be that they had that these were just the people in leadership, Moses and Aaron at the top, and then these 12 leaders of the tribes below them, and that they might have further organized quite a bit. In fact, I would guess they probably did, because otherwise how would you keep things moving? But just kind of interesting, there is some structure that God's presenting here. You also see this phrase, head of the house of his fathers. Again, this is the Abbayeth thing. So, fathers' houses, essentially. This is a slightly different phrase of it, but in the Hebrew it's the same phrase, Abbayeth. So, this again might be referring to Bayeth in just the sense of heads of the households, so the oldest living patriarch of a particular family. That would be the Bayeth concept. With Abbayeth, it's used so infrequently we're not sure, but again, it might be talking about somebody who's the head of the entire grandson lineage of Israel, one of Israel's sons. Might be somebody that was in charge of all of that. So not completely clear, but they were people who were already in charge of quite a bit, and now they are placed not just in charge of their families or the grandson's entire line, they're now in charge of the entire tribe of Israel. So it's a pretty significant promotion, with God specifically selecting them. Okay, I'm not going to go verse by verse through all the list of names. I do have a lot of things to say about that, but I'm not going to hit every verse because I don't have something to say about every single verse. I do have a few things to point out, though. So, the names in here might seem arbitrary and unimportant, but they're not. We know that the tribes of Israel are, generally speaking, the sons of Israel, right? They became their own tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel. But you'll notice if you look at this, there are a couple of exceptions. First of all, Levi isn't in there. Why isn't Levi in there? Even though he was one of the 12 sons, well, of course, he was given the duty and privilege of being servants of God in serving God in a special way. Parts of them were the priesthood, and it's a whole different discussion. But that's why they're not in there, and yet we still have 12 sons. Why do we have 12 sons? Well, you'll notice Joseph isn't in there either, and that's probably not a revelation to anybody, but instead Manasseh and Ephraim, Joseph's two sons, are in there instead of Joseph himself. So Joseph's two sons, second son being counted, takes place of Levi. Now, most of you probably know that if you're bothering to listen to a commentary on Numbers. But what you may not know is why Joseph has his two sons in there. Just a gut instinct sort of perspective, my thought would be, well, because Joseph's awesome. He's the only one who wasn't a complete tool and sold his brother into slavery. So that's enough reason, right? But no, that's not actually why he gets the special status where his two sons are chosen. Yeah, and it's kind of strange. It's not something I don't think I've ever heard anybody teach on this. And it's kind of spread throughout the Bible. It's kind of scattered. So I wanted to go through that because I thought it was pretty interesting. It's in there, but the pieces of the puzzle are kind of spread out through a whole bunch of different sections. So let's take a second to talk about, something else that's interesting. I should mention this too. Also, Joseph's two sons are in there, but it doesn't go in birth order. Instead, the second son is listed first, which is, an area of privilege, a position of privilege in listing, and the second son the first son is done second. So they're out of order. So let's go ahead and look at some verses that explain why Joseph has two kids in there and why they're out of order. All right, so Genesis 35:22. Again, the answers to this are kind of spread out, so you got to see a few different places, and it'll come together. So Genesis 35:22, just seemingly randomly, it mentions this story, this little incident. While Israel lived in the land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. And that's it. It does no more explanation, doesn't say any of the consequences or reasons of it. It just says that in this section, and that's it. And since this factors in, maybe you can see why at least I, and probably not most of you, have heard this taught on. The whole having sex with your father's concubine thing doesn't make the best Bible stories for Sunday school class. Or maybe it should, but not most churches. All right, so yeah, we just got this little piece. Reuben did a bad thing, and Israel knew about it. Moving on, Genesis 48:5. Now, this happens when Israel is about to die, and traditionally the father would do a blessing to, I don't know actually how traditional this was, I don't know if this happened all the time, but at least Israel wanted to do a blessing to each and one of his kids. What was traditional is that this is the bayith, the father's houses thing, so all the households underneath him. And when the father would die, the firstborn son would receive a double blessing. He would get twice what everybody else got. So for the family of Israel, this would be Reuben. He was the firstborn. But instead, he calls Joseph and his two sons in there. So this is where we see that something strange is going on. And then when Israel goes to bless Joseph's sons, he takes his hands and he puts the right hand on the second son. And that is not the place you want to be if you want the blessing. The special status, the better status, is to be the one who's touched by the right hand. So, he reverses that. Whoop. Should have framed this so I get more of my arms in there. Anyway, he reverses it, and this verse is a little snippet of that. Genesis 48:5. And now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, this is Israel talking to Joseph, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. And Joseph said to his father, not this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So we see Israel gave the double blessing to Joseph instead of Reuben. Doesn't explain why here, but he did. And he also chose the younger son to get the bigger blessing. I guess, I don't know if there was some reason for that. Maybe it was some sort of divine foresight sort of thing God granted him, or maybe something else that I've missed or that just isn't recorded in the Bible. But the younger son got the bigger blessing. And the final piece that clarifies this is way over in 1 Chronicles 5:1-2, where it says, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's couch, which is a way of saying his father's bed, or, did some sexual immorality that affected his father, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that he could not be enrolled as the oldest son. Though Judah became strong among his brethren, and a chief came from him, yet the birthright belonged to Joseph. So strange that it's mentioned several books away from, Genesis, where most of this information is recorded. But here in 1 Chronicles, it seems to be saying that firstborn status was taken from Reuben because of his sins with his father's concubine, and instead given to Joseph. And also mentions that Judah became kind of the leading tribe long term, but that still neither Judah nor Reuben got the blessing. That was Joseph. So that's why the two tribes, that's why the wrong order. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So you see here, the order given here is very intentional. It's not random. It was first Leah's sons in their order, and then Rebecca's sons in order of preeminence and birth. And then all order breaks down. And for the other people that are listed, it seems to be just utter chaos. I don't know how to explain it all, but instead it goes to the handmaid's children. So it makes sense that the handmaids would be last because they aren't actually wives. In case you're unfamiliar with it, the Rebecca and Leah started giving their children or their handmaids to have more children. They gave their handmaids to Israel to reproduce with them. So so that part makes sense that the handmaids would be listed last. But what's weird is the order in which they're listed, because it goes the first child of Rachel's handmaids, Rachel being the second wife, so that child's listed first, then the second child of Leah's handmaid, then the first son of Leah's handmaid, and then the second son of Rachel's handmaid. So why that order, I have absolutely no idea. It seems really weird to me. But moving on. I don't know what to make of that. If you do, let me know. All right, so we actually have some other interesting stuff in the list of names here. Numbers 1 through 7 says, from Judah, Nahshon, the son of Amminadab. Now, Nahshon is interesting because we actually know who he is. Beyond just being a random person named here, we have another piece of his identity. Specifically, we know he was actually Aaron's brother-in-law. Well, how do we know that? Because it was mentioned earlier in Exodus 6:23. Aaron took his wife Elisheba, the daughter of Amminadab, and the sister of Nahshon. And so Aaron's wife's father was Amminadab. She was the sister of Nahshon. And here we have in Numbers 1:7, Nahshon, the son of Amminadab. So it's clearly referring to the same person, and that's kind of cool, I thought. Just a little, I don't have any big point of it. I just thought, that's interesting. So a couple of things that strike me as hilarious is Pagiel is one of the people listed in verse 13, and he was known as the Axton of God. That's what his name literally meant. I guess I don't know exactly why he was named Axton of God, but it has to be some sort of funny circumstance. That's a hilarious name to me, and quite frankly, it makes me think of an unplanned pregnancy. Whoopsie, act of God. Now we have a kid on the way. So Pagiel. There are a lot of Pagiels in the world. Accident of God. I just thought that was funny. Another one that's funny is Ahira, which means brother of wrong. Wow. How bad does your brother have to be, your older brother have to be, for when you, the younger brother, born, they just say brother of wrong? It's hilarious. I don't know if you find it hilarious, but it is. It's hilarious. All right, what else do we have? So what's the purpose of this big list of names? Well, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly why they were recorded, but I did find something that was kind of interesting that gives us some idea of why maybe God felt this worth recording, this information of this big long list of names. And I'm not saying it's the only reason. There are probably many reasons. This is just one. So this comes from Hebrew Nerd, which this guy has a blog. He is a Messianic Jew. And what he points out is that we can actually learn a bit about the culture of the time and the historicity of the Bible, historicity just being a fancy word of saying the historical nature of the Bible, due to this list of names. So to explain that, we have to go back to the name of God. I don't know how commonly this is known. I would assume somewhat commonly, at least to the people who would probably be watching a commentary video. So as I understand it, and I have not looked into this in super detail, so take a little bit of a grain of salt with this one, but the common understanding seems to be that God revealed a special name of himself when he met with Moses on with the burning bush. All right, so let's go ahead and look at that particular situation. Exodus 3:15, and God said, moreover unto Moses, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel. You remember Moses was saying right before this, who do I say sent me when you're trying to send me back to Egypt to represent you? Who should I say sent me? And God said, moreover unto Moses, thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob hath sent me unto you. This is the name, my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. So you notice that word Lord is capitalized. So again, I don't know how much of this is like, oh, I didn't know that, and how much of this is stuff that everybody knows. But it seems that the Jewish people at some point, as they were transcribing the Bible, decided the name of God was too holy to even be written down or said. So they actually removed the vowel sounds from it, from my understanding. So what we're left with is simply the letters YHWH, and there's a lot of discussion as to how that should be pronounced. The most common thing I've heard is Yahweh. I've also heard some people say Yeshua, Yehovah, Jehovah, and there's probably a bunch more, all above my head. But for some reason, most translations decide to ignore that altogether and just use Lord, Lord, in all caps, and that's how they deal with that. So anytime you see that, that's actually seems to be a proper name of God. God was revealing, hey, this is how I want to be identified. I am Yahweh. So why is this interesting? Why is this relevant? Well, names of Yahweh are actually, there's the names of Yahweh. Different ways that it has been discussed. So why is this relevant? Because the names of Yahweh became, or the name of Yahweh became very commonly used in Jewish names. There obviously were, or not, I shouldn't say Jewish names, I should say the children of Israel. It's all throughout the Bible, taking parts of the name of God and putting it into the names of people's kids. So Zephaniah means Yahweh had hidden, Hezekiah means Yahweh strengthens, Isaiah means Yahweh is salvation, and there are dozens more I could put in here. All right, so what does any of this have to do with the names listed here in Exodus? How does it relate? Well, simple. None of the names here have any use of parts of the word Yahweh. They don't include that in any of the names listed, even though it was extremely common in the Old Testament to have the names of Yahweh in your names. So why is that? Well, it makes perfect sense when you realize that God had just revealed the name to Moses a short while ago, right before Moses had come to Egypt. So there wasn't time for people to start incorporating this name into their children, and those children to grow up and have these positions of leadership. So that's, to me, very interesting. If you had been just making up a story, it would be very easy. If you were, let's say, a Jew or an Israelite, several hundred years later, it would have been very easy for you to just use the names of the people you saw around you and be like, yeah, that guy and that guy and that guy, to fill in the blanks for these people that were in positions of leadership. But they didn't do that. Why? Because that name wasn't being used at the time. So it's just a little bit of internal consistency to the Bible story, which lends credence to it being real. It would have been very easy to goof that up if you were making up a story. They didn't, which adds to its historicity. And we can see that the culture of... We also get to see that it was something that changed once God arrived. They started using his name. Furthermore, we also see that there actually are some names in this section that do mention God. They just don't use the Yahweh name for God. So, for instance, in verse 10, there's Gamaliel. Well, El is a more generic name for God. It's not the Yahweh name for God, but it's the more generic name for God. In verse 12, we have Amashadai, and Shaddai is another more generic name for God. And this is also lends credence because we know in the Egyptian culture both of these names were the generic names for God, El and Shaddai, and in that, this part of the world, those were the sorts of words they would use to describe God. So all of this just kind of points to the Bible being legit, and that's cool. All right, so what else do we have here? In verse 16, which I forgot to put in my slides, it says, "These are the ones chosen from the congregation, the chiefs of their ancestral tribes, the heads of the clans of Israel." So we're wrapping up, almost done here. So chosen, that word chosen, some people have suggested, might actually be a specific title, like a title of honor that was given to them. It just means called, selected, famous, renowned. So they might have been the chosen as a sort of rank in Israel. We do know that this is not just something being done for the census. This is an ongoing position of leadership because we can see as we go forward in the Bible that these people continue to show up to perform a few ceremonial roles at different points. It says they were the chiefs of the ancestral tribes. Clearly this means they were, heads of the different groups like Reuben and Judah and Ephraim. They were, each one was in charge of their own tribe. It also says they were the heads of the clans of Israel. Now, we of course discussed clans earlier, and clans just means a generic term from familial group, right? Wrong. Now, the word is translated the same way. It uses clans in the ESV for both that earlier section, where it was talking about how people were supposed to be counted in the census, and here. It uses the same term both places, but they are different underlying terms in the Hebrew. It's a different term in the Hebrew. Let me show you. Right, clans here means hints, or the ox's head. It's actually just a single symbol, as I understand it. And it's basically used as a similar to a Roman numeral, the way a Roman numeral was, and it means thousand. So this is literally saying they are the heads of thousands. Now, what in the world does that mean, being the heads of the thousands of Israel? Well, it seems strange at first until you remember the whole thing with Jethro. You remember in Exodus, Moses was having trouble with all the people of Israel coming to him, and he just had too many people needing his help all the time. So, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came up with the idea of breaking people into smaller groups, basically setting up an entire judicial system. Here's his suggestion in Exodus 18:21. Jethro said, "Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens." All right, so the chief most group was those of thousands. You know, if a dispute couldn't be handled on the tens level, it'll be passed up fifties, hundreds, thousands, then it maxes up at thousands. Well, it seems to me that the Bible is saying here that these were people were placed in, these chosen were placed in charge of the thousands. So they then were the head judge, essentially, for all of Israel. Sorry, not for all of Israel, for all of their particular tribe that they led. To finish up the chapter, Moses and Aaron took these men who had been named, and on the first day, on the second month, they assembled the whole congregation together, who registered themselves by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and upward, head by head. As the Lord commanded Moses, so he listed them in the wilderness of Sinai. So, mostly just saying God did, or Moses did what God told them to do. And it does say that they did it on the first day of the second month, which was the same day that they got the direction from God. Now, I assume this means not that they completed the whole project, because, as we said, it would be a massive project, and they didn't leave for, I believe it was 19 days, if I'm remembering correctly. So they seem to have taken some time on it, but they set at work on it immediately. That's pretty clear. So I'm kind of interested, and I don't have a good answer on how exactly they did this whole process. I wish I did. Again, to throw in Rashi, that Jewish commentary guy, he said that of this section that they brought the records of their pedigrees, witnesses of their birth claims, so that each one should trace his genealogy to a tribe. And I heard many people saying this. I don't know, many Christian commentaries also said this. I don't know how that works. That seems like it would be an incredibly intensive process that would take even more time, and I wasn't able to get somebody to explain exactly how this whole process would work. It's an interesting thing to think about. It's also interesting to think about how they broke into companies. It makes me wonder if they, as they were doing it, were kind of like, oh, I can fight with that person, and I can be on teams with that guy, and yeah, we can work well together. I would assume there has to be some sort of process that was going on here as they were organizing people by company. So it's a complicated procedure, no doubt, and just kind of interesting to speculate on how exactly those things went down. So, that's most of what I had. I want to go ahead and talk about some things that are a little confusing to me. And I already mentioned these, but I wanted to mention it again. It really bugs me that the list of, when it's doing the list of the different tribes and who's in charge of the different tribes, who's given these positions as chosen heads of the tribes, it's following this nice little order where it's the sons of Leah according to birth order, the sons of Rachel according to honored position, with Ephraim being over Manasseh, and then the secondborn of Leah. So it's all, or secondborn of Rachel. So it's all in order. And then when it gets to those handmaids' children, it's all out of order, and I don't know why. I can't imagine it's just random when it was so orderly in the earlier section. So we got the first child of Rachel's handmaid, who is Dan; Asher, the second child of Leah's handmaid; Gad, the first son of Leah's handmaid; Naphtali, the second son of Rachel's handmaid. Why? Why is it out of order? It bugs me. If anybody has any insight on that, let me know. Also, the whole number of names, the whole way of keeping track of pedigrees, if anybody has any good articles or ideas on what the number of names means, if that's what it refers to, or how that would have been done. If anybody can help me out with that, I would greatly appreciate it. All right, so I want to end on just sharing some thoughts. I want to be careful to say that these are just my thoughts, some things, ideas that come to mind for me reading these sections. I'm not saying they're what the Bible explicitly teaches, because I feel like a lot of teachers and preachers kind of entwine those two, where they don't separate out what the Bible clearly teaches and what they get out of it. So I just want to make that distinction. I think these things are in line with the text. I think they're generally implied pretty clearly, but I want to make clear what's interpretive application of the passage and what the passage actually literally says. So just some things that come to mind for me. First of all, we're called to fight as Christians. This life is not for people who are going to sit down and quit or not take up their sword and do battle. Obviously, we're not talking about literal swords here. Christianity is, God never commanded it to be spread with a sword. That is not what Christianity is about. But we are supposed to be doing battle for thoughts and ideas and minds and hearts. We're supposed to be representatives of Christ. And to do that, you got to offend people. And I'm sorry, I should rephrase that. You don't necessarily have to offend people, but generally speaking, according to Jesus, when you speak the truth, it tends to offend people. And I'm not saying we aren't gracious in that, but I am saying we have to be willing to go out there and really stand and represent what we need to. We need to fight for what is right, with ideas and words. So, of course, everybody always says, and I believe they're correct, that taking the land of Israel is, the idea of the victorious Christian life. It's representative of that. If so, then the first thing you have to understand is if you're going to have the victorious Christian life, you got to be willing to fight for it, right? You don't just sit passively on the sidelines. Something else that comes to mind is you don't age of combat in God's army. I think it's very interesting. What are the standards of who goes to war, who's part of this war census? Everybody who's able to fight. If you're able to fight, fight. I think we have a lot of, and this comes to mind because I think we have a lot of Christians who just don't want to offend people. They don't want to rustle their feathers. They have their salvation, and that's good enough for them. And that's not what the Bible teaches for sure. And I've actually had older people say to me, older Christians, be like, oh, glad you guys don't have, I'm not living through this mess. I'm leaving it to you. And I'm kind of like, well, thanks, dude. Just leave me with the mess and then you're out, right? I got to live with this another 40 years. You think you could do more than say, sucks to be you? It would be helpful if you would continue to fight the good fight here. And I know there are people on of every age on the sidelines, but I think it's just a good reminder. When do you fight? When you can. And when God prompts you, of course. But we need to be ready to, and we always need to be standing for what's right. Easier said than done, I know. Another thing that comes to mind is you need to know the people that will be fighting by your side. This comes to mind. This is something I've really been focused on for the last year. I've been largely out of a church for the last, for nearly a decade. I haven't been out, but I haven't really been strongly committed to a church. The last few years, I've gradually got more and more in church, and especially this past year, I've started focusing more on really building relationships with the people in the church. But part of it is also, I want to know who's on my side. Like, I want to know who, when I really need help, is going to be able to help me. I want to know who's actually serious about God. And even outside my church, anytime I've been finding somebody who seems to be, serious about things of God, I've started kind of, hey, what's going on, man? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Kind of push on them a little bit or try to get some ideas out of them. And I'm trying to glean as much as I can from them because I want to know if they're serious, if there's somebody I can count on, if there's somebody who I can work with. I want to know if there's somebody who's going to have my back or who's going to stab me in the back. And I think that's important. So you need to know when it comes time to fight who's going to be fighting by your side. I think that's pretty important. And finally, God placed the most experienced and respected men in positions of authority, specifically, putting these chosen people in there. They were either heads of their household, or I'm kind of more inclined to the view that they were heads of basically the grandson tribes of Israel. Regardless, they had a position of authority. They were older. That's just how that society went. We can pretty well know that. And I think this is worth mentioning because in churches, that's not how things always work. A lot of times the old people are shoved to the side so we can get the fresh young blood in there and get the hip young audience. I've heard people articulate the ideas of essentially saying, oh, well, when these old people just move on or die off, then we'll take over, we'll make things like they should be. And to people who have that attitude, I have to say, what are you smoking? Are you crackheads? Now, look, it's fantastic to have younger people leading. It's wonderful. I don't think anybody should be limited to serving God based on their age. But the clear teaching of the Bible is that honor and respect, generally speaking, goes to those people that are older. I know there are horrible people who are older, both Christians and non-Christians. I'm not saying some blanket, follow whatever older people say sort of thing. But yeah, this attitude of let's just shove people to the side and get young people in there, it's dumb, it's bad, very bad. And specifically, I think of terms of youth ministry, which happens on all sorts of ages. It seems to be like the pastor is usually an older person, but then like the youth ministers and the worship leaders all have to be young and hip. And where do you get that from? It's not the Bible, that's for sure. I think it's great. I worked with youth when I was in my college years and worked a little bit with them in the intervening years. But, and it's great if people want to do that, and there's probably some unique benefits it gets from having somebody who's a little older leading the youth, but are we suggesting that people who are much older, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, don't have anything of value to teach young people? Where do you get that from? Where's that attitude? Again, not from the Bible. It's very bad. I guess that's it. I will probably do more of these. It's fun for me. I hope somebody out there will listen, and it'll be useful for you too. And I'm going to have to do a lot of editing because I babbled a lot. I guess now I get to learn to edit. Yay. All right, bye.